the session, you can you will be able to share your screen.
All right.
There is a green icon on your screen through which you can share.
Yeah.
Share.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've got it. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am. I can see the Zoom window on of your laptop screen.
Are you able to see the PPT?
No, ma'am. I can just see the Zoom window. Have you shared the web page or the screen, the entire screen?
Uh,
Because your PPT is not visible.
okay, 1 second.
Abhinav and ma'am, we are live. So once ma'am is done with the sharing, then you can start, right?
Okay, let me. Huh. Okay, now is it visible?
Yes, ma'am. It is visible. You can just uh, start the slide so that it is zoomed in.
It's completely fine, ma'am. Now you can keep on
Yeah.
scrolling the pages whenever you wish to switch the pages.
Okay, all right.
Yes, Abhinav, you may start.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Avinav Shukla, a senior content editor at Just Corpus Law Journal and the host for today's session. I, on the behalf of whole team of Just Corpus, welcomes you all in today's session on the topic sexual victimization of transgenders. Before we delve into today's session, let me provide a brief introduction of Just Corpus and the eminent guest speaker of the day. Just Corpus is an edtech platform established in 2020, comprising a collection of legal professionals. The platform aims to consolidate various aspects and chains under a single umbrella, with an impressive reach averaging 600,000 clicks per month on its website. Just Corpus was inspired by the growing needs of the law students. Just Corpus was inspired by the growing needs of law students. As part of its initiatives, Just Corpus has introduced an interdisciplinary journal known as the Just Corpus Law Journal. Now, turning our attention to today's focal point, we are privileged to have Ms. Eugratia Marwein as our esteemed guest speaker. Presently, ma'am is currently working as an assistant professor of law at Presidency University, Bangalore. She started her career as an advocate. She also practiced at Meghalaya High Court and in various other district courts as well. She also assisted a senior advocate in many arbitration as well as land acquisition cases. She began her practicing journey in 2020 and has a practice experience of 3 years. During this period, she took up cases both of civil as well as criminal nature. She then switched her career from litigation to academics in the year 2023, where she was working as a teaching associate at REVA University, Bangalore. The same year, in August 2023, she joined as an assistant professor at Presidency University, Bangalore. Her areas of interest lies in constitutional law and procedural law, such as CPC, CrPC, and IPC adoption, including media law and forensic law, among others. Her educational journey started in 2013 when she was pursuing her BA LLB honors from Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. Thereafter, she completed her bachelor's degree during the year 2018, and during the same year, she was enrolled for postgraduate. She has completed her LLM from Pune. In December 2019, she had cleared UGC NET examination and currently she is pursuing her PhD from REVA University, Bangalore. She has attended as well as presented papers in many national as well as international conferences. She has also judged various events such as ADR competitions, moot court competitions, etc. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to ma'am for her insights on the topic. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for that brief introduction. Very good evening to you all. My name is Eugratia Marwein, as you have heard from the introduction itself. Now, before delving into the topic, that is, before discussing into the topic as with carrying forward with the discussion, that is sexual victimization of transgender person. Now, this topic that we will be discussing, its main focal point is on the Transgender Protection of Rights Act of 2019. Now, most of us have read this act or even have gone through this act and have seen that the act as a whole was introduced in order to protect the rights of the transgender person. However, this has only been in paper. In practice, it is not the actual truth, especially when it comes to the transgender person perpet- uh, uh, when the transgender person is being portrayed as a victim. In that cases, the transgender act is basically silent. So on the basis, on that note, we will basically carry forward our discussion. Now, before looking into the topic, I would first like to introduce my topic by asking you a question as to, I think most of us or most of you have already read or are familiar with one of the most controversial or the most important case law that was being laid down in this with regard to a transgender, the rights of the transgender person. The case law is Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India, that in which the Supreme Court laid down one of the most instrumental judgment, thereby giving the transgender person not only the fundamental rights but also recognizing them as a citizen. Now, what is really important here is that in this judgment, if you have read the judgment, you have also read that this judgment was basically a constitutional bench, and our then Chief Justice of India, that is Chief Justice Deepak Mishra, in his judgment, in his mostly his obiter dicta part, has quoted one of the famous line of William Shakespeare, and that quote is, "What's in a name?" Now, when he quoted this quote, Justice Deepak Mishra, Chief Justice Deepak Mishra, basically he was in the line that the thought that why he quoted this line was that he basically thought that if we call a rose by another name, it will not lose its smell. The He penned down this particular word with the same thought that if a human being is called with another name, he will also not lose his identity as a human being. Now, as we all know that our constitution, the constitution itself allows positive discrimination. It does not allow negative. It mostly allows positive discrimination. Hence, just because there was no provision under the constitution that could safeguard or that could protect the rights of these transgender person, it did not allow or did not give a license to other person to basically criticize or to basically humiliate them or to discriminate them. So, for this purpose, the constitutional bench passed this judgment, keeping in mind that it will not only serve as a torch bearer to the transgender person in realizing their right, but also ensuring that they are being protected from the discrimination that is being faced in the society. Now, fast forward when we move 1 year ahead in 2019. In 2019, the legislature understood their assignment as to what was the judiciary trying to tell them. So the legislature came up with this act known as the Transgender Protection of Rights Act, and under this act included various other rights for the transgender, which basically included that there should be no discrimination against a transgender person, mostly on the ground of either um, educational basis, which means that they should have they should be given a means to basically have proper education in educational institution. There should be no discrimination, including with regard to residence or also with regard to also with regard to employment as well as any healthcare facilities. So these were some of the discrimination issues that was dealt with by the Transgender Protection Rights Act. However, this act is also limited. That is, it does not include all the other rights that a transgender person need, let alone to protect him. So, with that in mind, I would like to start this topic by basically giving an overview. Now, the overview that you are seeing here right now is basically on the historical perspective part. So we will first look at as to what are these transgender person. Now, these transgender person did not come up just recently into our society. Okay, most of us know that most of these transgender people existed in our society since the inception of time. Now, if we look at most of our religious scriptures as well, that is the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, or even in case of Bible also, these transgender person existed during that point of time as well. However, the reason why they were not recognized was that they did not want to come forward, or rather I would say they did not want to identify themselves, because they did not want to subjugate themselves from the discrimination that they are facing from the society. However, now the times are different. Now they are able to come forward and also basically fight for their rights. So now I would say that the transgender people are basically capable of fighting uh, as well as for asking for the rights that they are entitled to. Now, moving forward, before getting into it, I would also like to discuss the definition that is mentioned under the Act, that is the Transgender Act. Now, if we look at the Transgender Act, the Transgender Act defines a transgender as a person who identifies himself with and whose identity does not conform with the sex that was assigned to him by birth. So it basically means that a transgender person, irrespective of whether he was born as a male or a female, he can identify himself as another, and as another being, as another person, provided the Act says that he must follow the procedure that is mentioned in the Act. Okay, we all know the procedure that is mentioned in the Act. That is, he needs to first go to the district magistrate, get the certificate, and after he obtains the certificate, then he can identify himself as a transgender, which in more or less it goes against to the right that they were protesting against, that is to let themselves identify as to who they are. But in here they need the basically permission from someone else so that they can identify themselves as to who they are. Now, apart from that, if we look at the definition of sex and gender, now uh, before this, the definition or the term, I would say, sex and gender was used interchangeably. That is, most of the people before this thought that sex and gender were one and the same. They meant the same thing. However, sex and gender as of now means two different concepts. If we look at sex, as of now, the definition that has been provided is sex basically means the biological, it basically refers to the biological assigning of either a male or a female reproductive organ. So basically, if a person has been born with a male reproductive organ or a female reproductive organ, he will be based on that category as to whether he is a male or a female. That is with regard to sex. Whereas gender, on the other hand, has undergone a vast change. So if we basically come with a, we cannot basically come with a particular definition, but considering this, we can say that gender basically is a social construction of roles in which people basically include their roles, their behavior as to what kind of person they identify themselves as. So it is not just limited to sex, but basically with regarding to the behavioral changes that a person undergoes and also the role that he plays in the society. Now, moving forward, we also have sexual orientation and gender identity. Sexual orientation and gender identity also are two different meanings. Sexual orientation, as we all know, sexual orientation basically mean it refers to the attraction phase. So irrespective of whether you are a male or a female, irrespective of whether you have undergone gender reassignment surgery, if you are attracted to someone else, irrespective of whether they are male or a female, either romantically, sexually, or otherwise, that basically is termed as sexual orientation. However, gender identity basically refers to a person's one's own gender, that is whether he as to what he identifies himself as. So gender identity, I would say, as to whether what a person identifies himself as rather than what he was born with. So on the basis of on the note of that, we will move forward with into looking into what are the issues that a transgender person face. Now, when I come to the issues with regard to what are the issues that the various transgender people face, we need to understand that the transgender people have been facing various issues, not just right now, but from the inception of the society. So these are some of the few issues that I have listed down that the transgender people have been facing time and again, not only after the judgment have been passed, but also even after the passing of the judgment and even after the act coming into existence. These the issues that the transgender people face doesn't seem to go away. Some of the issues you can see is the lack of legal protection, in which they are mostly subjected to custodial violence. Now, in this also, there is it basically hampers or it basically obstructs their basic right. Now, there was one point of time where I remember that I was basically in a case, and there was a person and he was a transgender person. Now we all know that in jails or in prisons as a whole, there is no separate prisons, there is no separate cell for a transgender person. So if a transgender person is either imprisoned or he is booked for any sort of offenses, he is either kept with the male inmates or with the female inmates. So that also becomes some sort of a it basically becomes some it basically endangers the transgender person. So this basically creates it shows that the transgender that even though the law has recognized the transgender people, but in our society as of now, rather even in our legal system, they are not being recognized as a third gender. Even if you look in various states, that is with regard to filing, whenever you file an FIR with regard to the gender or the sex column, there is only male and female. In most of the states, they do not add the column of others. So that also is one of the major cause as to why a transgender person is usually kept either with a male or with a female inmate. So this is one of the issues or one of the legal lacuna we can say that is coming with regard to the protection of the transgender person. Now, apart from that, some of the other issues that a transgender person face is the educational is with regard to educational institutions. Now, even though the NALSA judgment has basically stated that some sort of reservation needs to be given for these transgender people and they need to be kept in the OBC category. However, we can see that most of the educational institutions have not done it so. No such provision with regard to giving them any sort of reservation has been made. Also, with regard to residential, now most of the time, if a transgender person is below 18 years of age, he is required to live with his parents. And also with regard, even if he has attained the majority age, he cannot own a residence of his own, mainly because most of the people do not want to rent out or do not want to provide any residential space for the transgender person. Similarly, when it comes to employment, now recently I have just come across one case wherein the civil aviation officer denied the license for pilot just because the person was a transgender person. So we can see that even though the act has prohibited discrimination on these grounds, but the society till date is not yet ready to accept, or is not yet ready to welcome any of these changes. So apart from that, the some of the other issues faced by them would be healthcare facilities. So even though if a transgender person has decided to undergo surgery, what are the what how can you say that whether he will be given the best of the healthcare facilities? Most of them basically cannot afford going into hospitals which are very high cost and high maintenance hospital. So they would basically go to hospitals which are unsafe. So this also creates some sort of it basically creates uh, some sort of healthcare issues when it comes to them taking care of their health. Also, if they are imprisoned in the in if they are imprisoned in any prison, and if they need to if they have undergone any surgery, and for that purpose they need healthcare facilities, it may not be provided as much as it can be provided if they have gone for maybe a private clinic or so. So apart from that, the other issues that we will be dealing with is the challenges that the act is posing. If you can see in my slide, I have mentioned that one of the first is the definition of the transgender person. Now, I have already discussed the definition of a transgender person. However, if you look at the definition of a transgender person, it is very limited in nature, which means that it includes almost everyone. So it is not just a person who is basically identifying himself as a transgender, irrespective of him being a male or a female, but even intersex variants. So even if a person, if he is a male and he is born with a female reproductive organ, he is also included in the transgender person. But vice versa, other peoples as well. So this basically it is like bringing in all together everyone from the herd and just keeping them in one category. So it is like basically telling that all the mammals, everyone, irrespective of him being a sheep, being a cow, whatever, they are being kept in one category. So that is why there is a need for this definition to undergo rigorous change. Apart from that, the other challenges which is posed by the act is the reservation, which I've already mentioned, the reservation for transgender with regard to educational institutions. And the most important challenge that is being put forward, that is being faced by the act as of now, is the penalty, or we can say the punishment that is being provided for offenders. Now, if you look at the Transgender Protection Act, the penalty or the punishment that is provided for any person who basically is committing an act of sexual assault, sexual harassment, abuse, or any sort of violence against a transgender person, the maximum number of imprisonment that he can undergo is 2 years. However, in the same manner, if you look at IPC, the punishment that is being given for such types of offenders with regard to such types of crime is for 7 years. So there is a huge gap of punishment or penalty with regard to these types of offenders. So in one case, you are basically kind of neglecting the transgender people, saying that if even a heinous offense such as rape is being committed on a transgender person, we are saying that the offender is only going to get 2 years of imprisonment rather than a person who is committing rape under IPC against a woman is getting 7 years. So there is basically a kind of a discrimination that comes in between. So this is also something which needs to be added or which needs to be looked into when with regard to the act. Apart from that, the other challenges that is being faced is the marriage. We have currently seen the era of same-sex marriage as on date. Even the recent judgment also given by the Supreme Court, although India does not recognize same-sex marriage, however, same-sex marriage has been recognized in almost most of the countries till date. However, as on date, India does not. So marriage is one of the concerns that is being put forward with regard to the rights of the transgenders, including divorce as well as adoption. So till date, a transgender is not allowed to adopt in India. So even if he wishes to go for an adoption, he cannot do so. Now, moving forward, the other challenge that is being um, faced by the transgender community is that the act of begging has been criminalized. Now, we first need to understand that, first of all, we are not giving any sort of opportunity of employment to these transgender person. And second of all, we are basically we are not giving any sort of basic means of livelihood for them to sustain or to survive. So if we are neither giving any sort of employment nor giving them any sort of affirmative action, allowing them to basically sustain themselves, then this basically hampers them, thereby increasing the rate of unemployment and also the rate of poverty in our country. This is also one of the challenges that the act basically poses. Now, why does the transgender community opposes this act? Now, although the act as a whole seems to be legit, it seems to basically trying to take care all of the rights and all of the necessary things that is required by a transgender person. However, the transgender community is opposing this act mostly on the ground that whatever is mentioned in the act, it does not addresses the rights of the transgender people nor protect them in totality. Although the act claims that if a transgender person that the it claims that a transgender person, he has a right to identify himself, but for that identification he needs the permission of someone else. Now, if he needs the permission of someone else to identify himself, then what is the point of self identification? That is one of the reason why the community is opposing this act. Apart from that, with regard to the right of residence, this right is also infringing their right with regard to Article 19 of the Constitution, which provides them a right to reside in any place. So, in this case, the transgender community is not given any right to reside in any place. Also, people who are below the age of 18 years, they have to live with their parents. So if a transgender person who is below the age of 18 years and who's living with their parents, and in case if the parents does not accept him as a transgender, then in that case he also faces the uh, problem of discrimination. Apart from that, the act also acknowledges hijra and trans women in their definition. Now, although these two categories are being acknowledged in the definition, however, the other category, which includes queer, trans men, or even intersex, have not been included in the definition. So instead of basically including the entire category as a whole in one definition, what I'm proposing is, why not basically give a separate definition for each one of them. Also, with regard to the punishment, that severe punishment should be given to the perpetrators who are committing such kind of heinous act against a transgender person, and to ensure that no such discrimination is being done with regard to a transgender person, either he or she is residing within the community, or if the person is basically someone who is of outside. So there should be no discrimination with regard to a transgender person or a normal person. They should be at par. So with that, I would like to end my session, and thank you very much for listening. And I am open for discussion if any one of you have any questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable insights. I I've received a lot of questions from the participants. I will address those questions one by one to you, ma'am. The first question that I have received is, how can we spread awareness related to it?
So, spreading awareness with regard to that, it has already been mentioned in most of the uh, guidelines that has been given by by the international organization, that is the UN, including the WHO. They have basically given certain guidelines with regarding to spreading awareness of with regard to the rights that is, or with regard to the discrimination that is being faced by the transgender, which includes community servicing, or basically uh, or some sort of uh, workshop could be done on it, in order to ensure that the public as a whole is educated with regard to the judgment that has been given by the Supreme Court, also with regard to ensuring that no such discrimination is being done. Because when the Supreme Court itself has said that they are considered as citizens, so I think we ourselves should not subjugate them to any sort of discrimination any longer.
Uh, Thank you, ma'am. The next question that I have with me is, like, how can we change the mindset of people, especially when I see uh, one of my friend or a classmate or a law student who think the same, that transgenders are unnatural. So how should we change the mindset of the people?
I think you cannot change this at one go. It will take one step at a time. So it's like if anyone is a transgender and that person is opposing to it, and he may have a religious background. So because of that, he may oppose to it, or for some other reason. Now, that will not happen there and then only. It's not that you will go and preach to that person something and that person will basically accept it there and then only. So this needs to happen in phase. So it's like you need to educate him first as to why. Then you need to tell him that these are not different person. They did not come from Mars or anything. They are from here only. They are the same people. Everything is the same. It's just their preference. So once they come to realize that, they come to understand that, they come to accept that, then in that manner, it would not be difficult for anyone to basically accept that and maybe move forward with it.
Uh, Thank you, ma'am. The next question that I have for you is, like, how do societal attitudes and stereotypes contribute to the prevalence of sexual victimization among transgender people? Like, and
Um,
then the next part of the question is, what legal and policy measures are in place to protect transgender individuals from sexual violence, and how effective are they? Though you have talked about this in great detail, but just a quick summary of the question answer would be.
so if I am getting it right, you are asking me to put a quick summary of what I have said, if I'm getting it right.
No, ma'am. The question was about how do societal attitudes and stereotypes contribute to the prevalence of sexual victimization among transgender people.
Okay. So, uh, when we talk about sexual victimization of transgender people, we are basically more focusing on the transgender person being portrayed as victims. Now, they are victims, they have been victims, I would say, since the inception. Okay. And the society, to be honest, have played a very important part with being able to make them realize that. So, how the society plays a part is what you're asking, right? How the society plays a part with regard to the sexual victimization of transgender, correct?
Yes, one is.
Yeah. So basically, uh, the society, until and unless the society learns to accept them, learns to accept who them as who they are, until that point of time, the transgender will continue to face oppression, and they will continue to face humiliation as well as discrimination. And this will lead, it will basically lead to many people either committing some sort of assault on them, if it's not verbally, then physically as well. So until and unless the society changes, then we can basically, so because even if we put up laws for for uplifting or enhancing or even stricter punishments as well, if the society itself cannot change their mindset with regard to it, then we, the lawmakers, will, their hands will still be tied even though they have made certain laws. It's like saying that stricter laws, stricter punishments should be given with regard to women if any sexual offenses is committed against women. So in this also, if the society itself does not change its mindset, it does not change the mindset with regard to the offenses being committed against women, that is, if they themselves only do not decrease in, they do not ensure that the crime rate, if the society itself only is not able to change with regard to the mindset, then in that case, the crime against women will still happen. The same way, if the society itself cannot, is unable to change their mindset towards a transgender person, then the crime rate with regard to a transgender person will also keep on increasing, because they are being looked into not as a person but rather as something below a person. So until and unless society are unable to change their mindset, then it will not come into effect.
Uh, Thank you so much, ma'am, for this beautiful answer.
Yeah.
The next question that I have with me is, how do factors such as identity, race, socioeconomic status influence the sexual victimization of transgender individuals?
How do?
How do factors such as identity, race, or the socio-economic status influence the sexual victimization of transgender individuals?
Identity, race, economical status. Now, uh, now when we talk about identity or race, most of some of us, if we look from the international perspective, not India perspective, but international perspective, if we see, uh, different people are identifying themselves as a different person. Now, when we talk about race, then it refers to a particular race. So you may be an African, you may be someone else, or you may be a European or an Asian for that matter of fact, but you are identifying yourself as a transgender. So in this, when we talk about identity, race, we need to understand that these two are two different concepts, first of all. So with regard to these two, or even economic condition, as you have said, that would basically come with when the employment level alleviates. So until and unless employment level alleviates, the economic condition would still be below, including education. Now, with regard to your question with on the sexual victimization of transgender, this would have a more impact, I would say, on the identity perspective, identity point of view, and to some extent the race. But but economic, sorry, economic perspective may not have to that extent, because I would say the economic perspective would be more towards the education or the employment factor. And when we talk about the sexual victimization part, it is mostly because they are being oppressed to some sort of sexual act. So in this, identifying as someone as another gender, which the other person may not like it very much. Okay, it can be also seen as a form of a hate crime. Okay, hate crime is also something which is very much prevalent in the LGBTQ transgender community as a whole. So with regard to that, um, it basically gives some sort of an upper hand over the offenders to commit such sort of an act. So it is mostly concerned with the identity and the race rather than the economic.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for these impressive and knowledgeable answers. Uh, we are done with the questions. In closing, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and delivering such information. Trust that the audience found it both interesting and knowledgeable. Thank you once again. We really anticipate the opportunity to host you again on our platform. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
I thank you. Thank you. I look forward to the same. Thank you. Thank you.